Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. This is the 13th night in a row we have led this show with the Brett Kavanaugh story. And it looks like after delays and countless twists in the saga, it may finally be coming to a conclusion. The FBI investigation, the one that Senator Jeff Flake demanded last Friday, appears to be wrapping up. A final vote could be held this weekend. That's what they're saying. But what's remarkable is that after all we have learned, there are still basic questions that remain unanswered, central ones that pertain directly to the core allegations here, the ones that Christine Ford made more than 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, for example, Fox News obtained a written declaration from an ex-boyfriend of Christine Ford's. In that declaration, which was made under oath, the ex-boyfriend says that Ford once coached a friend through a polygraph exam to help her get a federal job. If true, that would contradict what Ford told Congress. The man also says that during their entire 6-year relationship, Ford never mentioned being a victim of sexual assault or of any other kind of trauma. He says that she flew on airplanes many times, including on small prop planes around Hawaii. You'll recall that her lawyer said she was too afraid to fly to come to Washington. They also said she was a claustrophobic. He claims she was not at all afraid of enclosed spaces. Are these claims true? We don't know. Ford disputes them, and there is no evidence to support them independently. But there's also no evidence, you'll remember, to support Ford's allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. And that is the point. We need to know more. But we don't know more because nobody is asking these questions and many other questions. For example, we still haven't seen Ford's therapy notes or the notes on the polygraph exam she says she took. Ford's legal team is only now, at the very last moment, offering to reveal these, but only if the FBI agrees to interview Christine Ford. Why weren't these notes turned over at the very beginning of all of this? If the goal was to get to the truth, they would have been, of course. Why has Ford apparently told different stories about whether she showed her therapy notes to the Washington Post or simply described their contents to the paper? That's significant because it bears directly on her credibility. And Christine Ford's credibility is literally the only reason to believe that her story is true. So that matters. And there are other obvious unanswered questions. Here's this one. Ford says the assault defined her entire life. Apparently, she thought about it every day. It defined her academic performance. It affected all of her personal relationships. And yet she says she told not a single other human being about it for fully 30 years. How can that be? Well, here's an idea. In a Washington Post profile, Ford says that she, quote, came to understand her assault and its significance during a psychotherapy session. What does that mean exactly? Is Ford's story, at least in part, a recovered memory? This is a central question because most psychiatrists consider recovered memories, however sincere, as roughly as reliable as dreams. It's worth getting a clear answer on that, but so far nobody has because nobody has asked that question. Why is that? When an adult makes a serious allegation, asking real questions is the only correct response. It's not an attack to ask for follow-ups or probe inconsistencies. It's not victim shaming. In fact, it's patronizing not to. We don't consider Christine Ford a child. Many of her advocates clearly do. The press obviously does. Instead of gathering facts about this story, they are busy moralizing and lecturing the rest of us about how Brett Kavanaugh's very existence proves that an entire class of people is evil. Just the other day, Donald Trump Jr. made the point that what he's been watching on television makes him fear for his sons. Watch.
And when I see what's going on right now, it's scary.
Who are you scared most for, your sons or your daughters?
I mean, right now, I'd say my sons. I mean, I want to bring my daughters up to be tough, but every situation is different. But I would hope that they would act if something terrible like that happened. But when the other side weaponizes it against men and says, 40 years later, we can bring it up, and you did something in high school that no one remembers, but it should disqualify you from ever doing anything again, it really diminishes the real claims.
Now, maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. It's hardly a crazy point, though, and it might be worth talking about. But no, over on CNN, they took those remarks as a cue to once again attack an entire ethnic group on the basis of ethnicity. Watch this.
Every night, I cry myself to sleep over the fate of white men in America. White men have no power. White men, I mean, it's such garbage. If you sexually assault someone in high school, your life should be ruined. All this whining about the poor plight of white men is ridiculous.
You're hearing a lot of this filth recently, and it's wrong because racism is always wrong, no matter who it is aimed at. You should not attack people for their immutable characteristics, period. We have made that point consistently again and again over the past 2 years on this show. You shouldn't ever reduce people to their skin color because they're much more than that. You ought to treat people as individuals, unique human beings, not faceless members of a tribe sorted by hue. That's exactly the argument you could have made in 1960 against Bull Connor, and if we'd been there, we would have made that argument. It's the same argument we are making today. It was true then. It is true now. It always will be true. Now, you wouldn't think you'd have to say something that obvious in a developed country, one that literally has a statue of Martin Luther King on the National Mall. But we do have to say that. We have no choice. And for the crime of arguing against racism, we are denounced by the left as, yes, racist. Well, that's insane. In fact, it's Orwellian. It's the mirror image of the truth. But there is a reason that they are saying it. Our elites stoke race hatred in order to divide this country against itself. People are easier to control when they are divided into tribes sorted by color. It is that simple. It is also that evil, just like the racism they are peddling to you. We will never endorse that against any group at any time, period. Francie Hakes is a former DOJ National Coordinator for Child Exploitation, Prevention, and Interdiction, and she joins us tonight. Francie, thanks for coming on. Now, I know that you have worked in this field for so long, and that's why I wanted a reality check from you on some of these outstanding questions. And I want to say the obvious at the outset. I'm not impugning anyone's character or story, but I think it's fair to ask the most basic question, which is this a recovered memory or not? Are you aware that anyone has asked that question of Christine Ford?
Tucker, one of the things that disturbed me the most about the hearing last week were the questions that weren't asked by Rachel Mitchell. And that included anything about Dr. Ford's memories, the memories of the event, the memories of the events surrounding the event, the memories of giving information and paperwork to the Washington Post, what happened at her polygraph. It appeared to me that there were some memory questions asked that left a whole lot of other questions in limbo. We never got anything that would have helped us with the question of her memory and how it came about. You're so right about that.
So would it be an attack on a witness, on someone who says she's been a victim of a crime, to say, you say that this memory became significant to you in the course of a psychotherapy session 30 years after the fact. Did you remember all the details of it for the 30 preceding years? And if so, why did you not, if it defined your life, why did you not say anything to anyone else? Would that, do you think, be an attack on her, or would it be a legitimate question?
Well, Tucker, if you look at Twitter, any question of someone who alleges she's been assaulted is an attack. But I've put 5-year-old little girls on the witness stand who had to face withering cross-examination from men about whether or not they were telling the truth, how much they remembered, testing their memory at every turn, testing their credibility. 5-year-olds. So if they can do it, Dr. Ford can do it and should have done it.
So what does it tell you? And boy, that must have been tough. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to do that, though I agree with you. It has to be done because due process demands it. But what does it tell you about how Christine Ford's advocates feel about her, that they believe that she cannot withstand and shouldn't have to withstand basic questions about her story?
You know, I mean, I don't know Dr. Ford. If I was Dr. Ford, I'd be insulted at someone saying I'm not tough enough to stand up and take questions about something that was seared into my memory and that I feel like I haven't gotten justice for. I mean, I'm not kidding about having put up 5-year-old little girls who have said, I want to testify, I want to tell the truth, I want him to go to jail. And they make that decision for themselves. To say that a grown woman can't make that kind of decision for herself insults all women. I'm insulted.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, you know, if you're going to... Right, I agree with that completely. Francie Hakes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, we have some news for you tonight. A man was just arrested for making threats against Republican senators. Apparently, he worked for a well-known Democratic lawmaker. We're going to have much more on that unfolding story after the break, and of course more on Brett Kavanaugh to come. It's one of the many themes discussed in my new book, Ship of Fools, which just came out yesterday. We'll be right back. This is a Fox News alert. A Democratic staffer on Capitol Hill has been arrested for allegedly publishing the private information of U.S. senators. During the Brett Kavanaugh hearing last week, private phone numbers and home addresses of Republican senators were posted online. It was apparently an effort to promote harassment, intimidation, and who knows what else against those lawmakers. Now authorities believe they have arrested the man who did it. He is called Jackson Costco. He's an intern for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas. Costco also previously worked for Democratic Senators Barbara Boxer and Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. He's been charged with burglary, witness tampering, making threats, and identity theft in relation to these actions. We'll, of course, continue to follow the story. Well, Senator Lindsey Graham, as you know, has emerged really out of nowhere as one of Brett Kavanaugh's most aggressive defenders. He continued that defense today at the Atlantic Festival, named after the ludicrous magazine that sponsors it, and he was booed for what he said. Watch this.
I'm the first person to say, I want to hear from Dr. Ford. I thought she was handled respectfully. I thought Kavanaugh was treated like crap. Yeah, well, boo yourself. Here's what
all right. Look, I'm going to ask you to please be respectful of this conversation so we can have the conversation.
That's right. I have nothing. I really believe that Brett Kavanaugh is not a gang rapist, a sexual predator, or a stumbling, bumbling drunk. I really believe that, and I don't care whether you believe it or not.
Lou Dobbs hosts Lou Dobbs tonight on Fox Business. He joins us tonight. So, Lou, if you're attending the Atlantic Conference, you consider yourself like an erudite person. You know, this is not a cross-section of America.
Oh, no.
These are people with HBS degrees who worked at McKinsey. Like, they're way better than you and much smarter.
Absolutely.
And yet their response is boo.
By the way, and that's a very large club you just defined. The fact is that these people who were booing Lindsey Graham, they think of themselves as the literati.
Yes.
In fact, they're more gaudy than literati. And the further truth is they're ill-mannered sops. And many of them just outright ideological hacks. So I have no idea how they got the idea that this was some sort of festival, unless they're celebrating their inadequacy to chronicle our times and to enlarge our minds. It is a farce.
Do you think if Creepy Porn Lawyer had been up there on the stage,
it would have been perfect.
Eyes too close together and the whole thing, do you think they would have booed him?
I don't think they would at all. I think they couldn't have resisted a standing ovation. They could have, and the excitement in the room would have verged on the obscene and vulgar.
It's what's so interesting is you see a lot of revolutions, you read about them, they're almost always waged on behalf of the working class. Have you ever seen a revolution like this one waged against the working class?
You know, I haven't. I haven't even read such a revolution. And these people are not revolutionaries. They're far too orthodox. They're far too mediocre in their own
good point
imaginings. And frankly, they can't escape themselves and their base, crass, and yes, vulgar obsessions. These are people completely consumed by grievance, by identity and group, to the point that they have lost any sense of individual responsibility or individual right. They're authoritarian to the point of being not socialist, communist. They want to be Marxist, they want to be fascist, and by the way, their desires are coming true. What they are doing is ignoring truth, ignoring values, ignoring any sort of fidelity to decency, and what they have become is frankly unspeakably ugly and awful and threatening to the very republic.
How did so many unimpressive, small-minded people make so much money and get so much power? Somebody needs to study this. We're unfortunately out of time. Will you write a book on that? Because I will read every word of it.
Will you let me have all of the advance on it and everything?
I don't know if there's a market for it. I'd buy it.
I'll take up the assignment. Thanks so much.
Great to see you, Lou. Thank you.
Great to see you, Tucker.
Hillary Clinton yesterday indicated that regardless of his guilt or innocence, Brett Kavanaugh disqualified himself because of his temperament. Watch.
We have not seen anything quite like that for a long time. Justice Thomas vigorously defended himself, as some of us can remember, and it was a very painful, difficult time for Anita Hill and for many of us watching. It very much felt like, in fact, it probably was, the denial of the legitimacy of women's stories. In this case, though, the performance, the behavior was quite out of bounds.
Keep in mind that is the very same crowd you just saw boo Lindsey Graham. That would be worth remembering how Hillary Clinton herself behaved when she appeared before the Senate. Here's a reminder.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
Because it's really about temperament. Richard Goodstein is a former advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton. And despite his bad opinions, a great guy, and we're glad to have him. Richard, thank you very much.
And I was in the audience, just for the record, when Lindsey Graham spoke today at the Atlantic. Just the interest of full disclosure.
Well, you must have a Harvard degree. I'm very impressed. You probably do, actually. But let me ask you, so Hillary Clinton, when she called Monica Lewinsky a narcissistic Looney Tune, and I'm quoting now, was she believing all women when she said that?
Well, I mean, that's not a quote. That was a report.
It is a quote.
Look, what she was trying to say in the Atlantic interview yesterday is that unlike the 11.5 hours that she submitted to testimony and kept her calm on the Benghazi hearings on the House side, where Trey Gowdy concluded she had done nothing wrong, Brett Kavanaugh, after less than 15 minutes, totally fell apart. And again, is that the behavior that we want to see in a Supreme Court justice? That's really the only point that she was making.
Yeah, no, it's
a
totally fair point. You accuse someone of the sex crime with no evidence. His family's completely under attack. He'll never work again. People are calling for his impeachment before he even gets on the court. That's totally cool. Imagine if you really didn't do it or believed you didn't do it. How would you? I'm surprised he was as calm as he was. Honestly, like, how would you respond? Sincere question.
As far as the evidence is concerned, the evidence is Mark Judge's girlfriend, at least in the papers, was reported to have said that he confessed to her behavior like this. She said this to a therapist. You know, I heard your earlier guest.
Wait, confess that Mark Judge did that? So Mark Judge has now been nominated for the court? Or
no.
What, are we going to bring him up on? Why are we attacking Mark Judge exactly? What does he have to do with anything?
But what we want is somebody who is unimpeachable, not unindictable.
Who is not friends with Mark Judge? Like, what is Mark Judge? So Mark Judge's girlfriend,
yes,
Elizabeth Razor, I think her name is, from Maine, says that Mark Judge at one point told her during their 6-year relationship that he had done something bad in high school. Okay. What does that have to do with Brett Kavanaugh exactly?
Well, it may be evidence, and we'll find out what Mark Judge says if we ever get a look at this FBI interview, that he may have actually been there. And you know,
but Mark Judge already said under oath that he wasn't, that this didn't happen.
Through his lawyer submitted a letter. Let's subject him to kind of.
It was a sworn statement. I mean, he could be brought up on perjury charges. Let's subject him to cross-examination. That was the flaw in Rachel Mitchell's report, is that she was basically opining. She never talked about Kavanaugh's testimony. She never spoke openly to Ford separately. So let's let the FBI kind of get the facts out, and then we'll see, you know, whether any of these stories hold up or not. What the president said last night was despicable. Okay, so here's what, right, and maybe we should throw Mark Judge in prison because his former girlfriend said he said something ugly to her. I mean, I think that's the standard now. As a guest explained last night, if you feel it in your heart, it's true, because America actually has gone crazy. I only have a U.S. passport, so I'm here to the end. I'm going to keep fighting against this, but a lot of other people are going to leave. Let me, really quickly, do you think, and I hate, you know, going into like the deep, dark past, not 37 years ago, but like 20 years ago, but do you think Hillary should apologize for directing the smear campaign against her husband's former girlfriends? You know, which she did.
I think there were people in the Clinton White House who hung on to the notion that Monica Lewinsky was making things up. I never heard Hillary Clinton say that publicly, and everybody who was kind of a public defender of Bill Clinton's never said that. And all I'm saying is, let's, Brett Kavanaugh is up for a lifetime appointment.
Wait, stop. I covered it. I was there for all of it. And Sidney Blumenthal was, of course, the closest.
But never publicly. Yeah. He never actually went on the air and said those crazy things.
Well, he said it to me, actually, directly to me on the telephone the day that it broke. She's a stalker. So this was being directed by Hillary. There's no debate about it. A lot of books written on this. People who work for Hillary have said it. Look, I'm not saying she should go to hell for it or go to prison, but shouldn't she apologize at least for that?
I got bad news for your audience. Hillary Clinton is not running for president.
No, but
you
she,
can run as many
as a
segments as you
person. Shouldn't she just say, I'm sorry, you know what? I felt my husband was under attack. I attacked his girlfriends. I should have believed all women. You never said
Again,
that.
she talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy, which I think the record shows, and Brett Kavanaugh was part of it. Why did he have that prurient interest? Listen,
I'm sorry,
Tucker,
I'm going to have to call
Brett
time.
Kavanaugh
Not just
have
because we're
a
out of time.
prurient interest in Bill Clinton's sex life and what he and
a
Monica
sex
Lewinsky
criminal.
did? Doesn't that kind of trace up here?
This is too crazy.
Just asking.
Great. That's an excellent point. Richard, great to see you tonight. Thank you very much. Good try. Good try. Democrats have not proven any of these allegations against Kavanaugh. Some are now saying he must step aside simply for being accused. That's a brand new standard in the country that you grew up in. Are you comfortable with it? We're going to ask Alan Dershowitz if he is. That's next.
This is not a partisan moment. This is a moral moment in our country. Ultimately, not whether he's innocent or guilty, this is not a trial, but ultimately, has enough questions be raised that we should not move on to another candidate.
That was Senator Spartacus of New Jersey saying, as you just heard, it doesn't really matter if Brett Kavanaugh is innocent or if he's guilty. Democrats have spent so long attacking him without tangible evidence that really it's his obligation to just submit and let his career and reputation and family be destroyed, for the good of the country. It's a moral question. Alan Dershowitz is a retired Harvard Law professor. He's the author of the best-selling The Case Against Impeaching Trump. He is our reality check on first principles, and he joins us tonight. Do you think, Professor, that that's a fine stand? It doesn't matter whether he's innocent or guilty. He should just submit.
Well, it sounds very familiar. When I was in college, that's what they said about people who are accused of being communists.
Yes.
It doesn't matter whether you're innocent or guilty. If somebody has accused you of being a communist and you angrily responded and said you're not, then A, you don't have the temperament to have the job. And it's just a job interview if you're getting fired from being a professor after 40 years. And what's the difference if you're innocent or guilty? Somebody has said you're a communist. This goes all the way back to the Inquisition, when they would call you in first and make you testify, and then they'd present the evidence. Look, once you're accused of the most heinous crime imaginable, it turns into a trial where you have due process,
yes,
where the burden of proof is on the other side, where the evidence has to be clear and convincing. In America, we don't allow people to destroy other people's reputations and careers based on an inference of guilt, the way the ACLU now says. The ACLU says we should presume guilt, not presume innocence.
After 100 years of defending due process, that's exactly what they're saying. So you are a liberal, you have lived your life in a liberal world, you go to Martha's Vineyard, you know liberals. Do any of them ever say, look, I don't agree with Kavanaugh, I hate Trump, but I agree with you that due process is worth preserving? Are there liberals who feel that way?
I've found very, very few of them. For example, today, 700 law professors signed a letter. They asked me to sign it. I refused. I wrote a dissent, saying he now no longer has the judicial temperament. Well, can you imagine if this were a liberal who had been appointed by a liberal president who had been accused and who had acted similarly? I don't think a single one of those professors would have signed that letter. They all fail the shoe on the other foot test. Senator Booker, who I like and know, is just dead wrong. This is all about partisanship. If the opposite was happening, and if it was the Democrats who were putting up a candidate, everybody would be behaving the opposite way. And so it is partisanship. And I think the framers of our Constitution never intended the confirmation process to look anything like this.
I agree. And I hope that I would be honest enough to say so. I mean, we defended Al Franken on this show, whom I don't like personally, and I hate his politics, but I think he got shafted for the same reason.
I defended him, too.
Yes, he deserved to be defended. You wrote, or you were quoted in a recent piece saying that Julie Swetnick's lawyer may have a legal obligation to withdraw her previous statement. What did you mean?
Yeah, I've done some research now on it, and there are ethical and bar rules that say that when you submit an affidavit, even to Congress, and you later learn that there are things in the affidavit that are false, you have a continuing obligation to withdraw the affidavit. You cannot allow an affidavit to remain on the record if you have information suggesting it's false. And any reasonable lawyer hearing her on television says you can't any longer accept what's in that affidavit. She has to be investigated independently of the background check, criminally investigated, to see if she deliberately and willfully, with or without the aid of anybody else, made a decision just to frame somebody for something that he had nothing to do with. The evidence seems to suggest they never knew each other, they were years apart, they were operating in different circles. It wouldn't surprise me if an FBI investigation proved they never met each other. And if that turns out to be the fact, she belongs in a court of law, being prosecuted with a presumption of innocence,
yes,
defend her, but if the evidence shows that she committed perjury, prison.
Wow.
You know why? Because it's so
why.
important to protect people against being raped, but it's so important to protect people against being deliberately and willfully, falsely accused of rape. That is a very, very serious crime, and we tend not to pay as much attention to false, deliberately false. I'm not talking about people making mistakes and forgetting, but deliberately false frame-ups of rape have to be taken seriously.
And they're not, I happen to know. Alan Dershowitz, Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Free speech is evaporating in this country after 240 years. The biggest threat turns out not to be the government, but instead corporations, schools, and especially the online mob. What happened, and more importantly, how can you say what you really think in the face of all of this? Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports is managing to do that. He joins us next to discuss how. If you're interested in what happened to free speech and why the people who once defended it now attack it, there's a long and detailed chapter on that in our new book, Ship of Fools, just came out. Hope you'll read it. Previous on the show, we've told you how employees at Google discussed altering search results to undermine the White House's immigration policies. At the time, Google said it has never changed search results for political reasons, and it never will. We knew it was untrue then. Now we can prove that it is untrue. The show has obtained internal Google emails in which an employee discusses editing YouTube search results to suppress videos based on their political content. Here's one example. Last March, Google engineer Dong Zhao sent an email saying the company wanted to, and we're quoting, demote low authoritative content on controversial queries to fight against fake news. This was not hypothetical. He said the company had already succeeded in suppressing unwanted videos for searches like Hillary and, we're flattered here, Tucker. It's not clear which videos were suppressed because Google won't admit it or tell us, but the email does indicate that Alex Jones and InfoWars were a major target of this. Google says their efforts are not political and meant to fight conspiracy theories, though for the record, we have never endorsed any kind of conspiracy theory on the show and never would. And by the way, how does Google define a conspiracy theory? They haven't told us that either, or why a superpower global monopoly ought to be making that decision in the first place, since they have a congressional exemption in which they promised not to. They promise to be a conduit through which information flows and not a news site that edits it. Congress might want to rethink that agreement. Well, it's no secret, rather, that free speech is evaporating in this country. Even if the government is still prevented from punishing your speech, you're more than likely than ever to be suspended from school, fired from your job, or banned from social media for saying something that dissents from the consensus or that simply makes a few people feel bad. Dave Portnoy is at the very center of this. You may know him as El Presidente. He's the founder of Barstool Sports, the beating heart of it. Barstool Sports is not a political site, but it has faced repeated demands that it be censored. So we want to talk to him about what that is like. Dave, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You're not a political site. I wouldn't say you're a conservative. I think you're probably a liberal. I'm not going to ask you. I don't know what your politics are. But you're not a political guy. But you have been the target of repeated demands for censorship. Have they increased in the last few years? If so, why? And what do you do?
Yeah, they have increased nonstop. We just keep trying to be us. Now, we've grown. We're probably over 100 people now in the company. And there's differing views because the more I talk, the more I tell the truth, the more people may come at us from different angles. But my philosophy and how I started the company is I will just always tell it as I see it. I won't be dictated to by outside forces. But it's definitely increased. It's definitely been a major increase in the last 2 years on how people attack us, basically.
So what don't they like? Since you're not a political site, I know a lot of our viewers are frequent Barstool Sports. They know you're not pushing a political agenda. So why are people mad at you? What triggers them?
It's tough to say. A lot of it, they view us as sexist. They view us as a sexist site, and we have in the past. Well, in the Sports Illustrated, we feature girls in bikinis at different times. It's a men's culture website. Amongst other things, we consider ourselves a comedy site. And then the narrative starts to build. A lot of the people who comment now really have no idea who we are. They see something linked on Twitter. They see somebody maybe comment about an article, and then when I react to them or talk to them or go any deeper, they literally have no clue what we do. They're just seeing this cycle, this vicious cycle basically on social media, and it all just feeds on itself. But they don't know our history, they don't know me, they don't know what we've been doing for 15 years.
It seems like it's a war on humor itself. Like there's something about jokes that makes a certain kind of person really angry.
Yeah, it's hard to say. They just fulfill on each other. Social media, I think a lot of it, social media has just given people a voice that, you know, they can exert pressure on advertisers and do different things. And if they don't like something you said, or they think a joke isn't funny, or they take something literally, I've always explained it this way. For us, it would be if somebody went to a comedy show and they didn't have a ticket, they didn't know who the comedian was, they walked into the room, they heard a joke, then they walked out in the street and said, hey, you'll never believe what this guy's saying, but they give no context of how the joke was told, where they saw it. That's what happens a lot of times with people like us, and I think a lot of people in the comedian business.
So the irony, actually the reason I want to talk to you more than any other is that you have not bowed before the online mob, begged and scraped for forgiveness. You've continued to do what you think is right, which is telling the truth, and you have thrived.
Yeah, and at some level, I've benefited since I started the company, and I ran it myself with other employees, but I was at the top until 2 years ago when we sold half of it to a group of investors, a Turning Group, who have stood behind what we did. And I would rather, this may sound crazy, I'd rather go down with the ship than give in to these people. I just can't do it because I know who I am. I know my character. I know the character of the people that we hire. I will not let people who have no idea what we do, no idea how hard we work, no idea how long we did it. We outworked, out-hustled, out-blogged everybody else that we did. I'm not going to let somebody who has no idea what we do make stuff up about us, pull stuff out of context, and make me change what I do. I will not do it.
Brave people win in the end, and you're living proof of it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I'm kind of inspired. Actually.
I'm fired up myself.
Good for you. El Presidente. Well, The View is supposed to be a chatty, inoffensive daytime talk show, but it's not anymore. It's kind of getting a little nutty, actually. We're going to tell you what happened most recently on that program after this. Donald Trump Jr. recently noted that the Kavanaugh saga has made him worried about his own sons. He's not the only one who feels that way. Well, on The View, Whoopi Goldberg says that if he has that fear, it must be because his sons are future rapists. Watch this.
You only worry about this for your child if you think your child has these tendencies. If your child is not someone who's assaulting people, it shouldn't be a concern for you.
Don Jr.'s oldest son, by the way, is not even 10 years old. But that's not surprising what you just heard. The View has recently warped from a breezy daytime show into a font of deranged propaganda. Not an overstatement.
These white men, old, by the way, are not protecting women. They're protecting a man who is probably guilty.
I have to tell you, as a woman, I think you're trying to take my rights away.
That's right.
Get out of my behind. Get out of my vagina. Get out.
So it's almost like they're worried that, oh, white people are going to lose all their power. Pretty soon we'll be like South Africa, apartheid, where 10% of white people were running the country.
You know what's horrible?
What's horrible
when the president of the United States whips up people to beat the hell out.
This president has started this war against the media. These are the acts, in my opinion, of a dictator.
Joy Behar, Karen Johnson, acting under her stage name Whoopi Goldberg, and the rest. Ann Coulter is a columnist, a great one, author of the book Resistance is Futile, How the Trump-Hating Left Has Lost Its Collective Mind, and possibly a View watcher. Who knows? She joins us tonight. What do you make of this? This is not the View that you remember, is it?
Well, I can't say I was ever a huge View watcher, but I've liked it. I do think the left has lost its mind over Trump. I think it's worth pointing out, I'm listening to this hate speech from the left on Kavanaugh. Senators Collins and Murkowski and Flake, you know, they're so touchy about, the loss of civility under Donald Trump, and he's so, he's so indecent. We want to respect our institutions. If you want to respect the institutions, then vote to confirm Kavanaugh and end this mob attack on obviously a very respectable and perhaps the most impressive judge who's ever been nominated.
But it's just a little weird where it's
Supreme
coming
Court.
from. So you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, all of us were informed by our superiors that we needed to hate Alex Jones, who had a website because it was a threat to our democracy. This is the ABC broadcast network. This is one of the oldest and biggest broadcast networks. And you have one of their main anchors accusing someone's 9-year-old son of being a potential rapist.
Well, I liked Whoopi's mention of criminal tendencies, and I'm thinking this idea of criminal tendencies is something we should start working into the criminal law. We're definitely going back to stop and frisk if we're allowed to consider criminal tendencies.
Well, that's right.
This is so contrary.
First of all, shame on you for thinking through the implications of what Whoopi Goldberg says.
Not to say the more obvious point of, I mean, this idea that, well, you only need to worry about this if you're a criminal. Why do we have to get warrants to search somebody's house then? No, there are rules for these things, and the basic rule is that there should be evidence. I mean, one of the things
evidence? You're an extremist, Ann Coulter. I can't believe we're giving you a platform. Evidence?
One of the things I keep hearing people say is, you know how credible she's not a doctor, only an MD is a doctor, Dr. Ford was, how credible they act as if this is a case that we're all just going to sit home in our living rooms and watch this, and well, she seemed credible to me. But, you know, Meryl Streep was credible in Sophie's Choice. She wasn't at Auschwitz. She hasn't committed suicide. No, we're not talking about just judging someone's performance. That's why we have evidence, and wow, the evidence is overwhelmingly against Christine Blasey Ford, not a licensed psychologist. I do think the tide seems to have turned because I am a hate watcher. I mostly watch MSNBC and CNN, and I noticed since these latest, the ex-boyfriend of Dr. Ford, has come out and said, I lived with her for 6 years. She never talks about sexual assault. She flew all the time. She's not afraid of closed spaces. Oh, yeah, and she stole $600 from me. Suddenly they're talking about Russia again.
I'm so glad that you watch that and keep us current. Boy, I've never missed your column. Ann Coulter, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Well, we have new evidence tonight that academia literally is a joke. We couldn't make this up if we tried. We wish we had, actually, because it's so good. By the way, Ship of Fools, out this week. If you want to know why academia has become a joke and why your tax dollars should stop supporting it, the answer's inside. Previously on the show, we've told you how employees at Google discussed altering search results to undermine the White House's immigration policies. At the time, Google said it has never changed search results for political reasons, and it never will. We knew it was untrue then. Now we can prove that it is untrue. The show has obtained internal Google emails in which an employee discusses editing YouTube search results to suppress videos based on their political content. Here's one example. Last March, Google engineer Dong Zhao sent an email saying the company wanted to, and we're quoting, demote low authoritative content on controversial queries to fight against fake news. This was not hypothetical. He said the company had already succeeded in suppressing unwanted videos for searches like Hillary and, we're flattered here, Tucker. It's not clear which videos were suppressed because Google won't admit it or tell us, but the email does indicate that Alex Jones and InfoWars were a major target of this. Google says their efforts are not political and meant to fight conspiracy theories, though for the record, we have never endorsed any kind of conspiracy theory on the show and never would. And by the way, how does Google define a conspiracy theory? They haven't told us that either, or why a superpower global monopoly ought to be making that decision in the first place, since they have a congressional exemption in which they promised not to. They promise to be a conduit through which information flows and not a news site that edits it. Congress might want to rethink that agreement. Well, it's no secret, rather, that free speech is evaporating in this country. Even if the government is still prevented from punishing your speech, you're more than likely than ever to be suspended from school, fired from your job, or banned from social media for saying something that dissents from the consensus or that simply makes a few people feel bad. Dave Portnoy is at the very center of this. You may know him as El Presidente. He's the founder of Barstool Sports, the beating heart of it. Barstool Sports is not a political site, but it has faced repeated demands that it be censored. So we want to talk to him about what that is like. Dave, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You're not a political site. I wouldn't say you're a conservative. I think you're probably a liberal. I'm not going to ask you. I don't know what your politics are. But you're not a political guy. But you have been the target of repeated demands for censorship. Have they increased in the last few years? If so, why? And what do you do?
Yeah, they have increased nonstop. You know, we just keep trying to be us. Now, we've grown. We're probably over 100 people now in the company. And there's different views because the more I talk, the more I tell the truth, the more people may come at us from different angles. But my philosophy and how I started the company is I will just always tell it as I see it. I won't be dictated to by outside forces. But it's definitely increased. It's definitely been a major increase in the last 2 years on how people attack us, basically.
So what don't they like? Since you're not a political site, I know a lot of our viewers frequent Barstool Sports. They know you're not pushing a political agenda. So why are people mad at you? What triggers them?
It's tough to say. A lot of it, they view us as sexist. They view us as a sexist site, and we have in the past. Well, in the Sports Illustrated, we fit